Hello everyone, I am Carolina the Storyteller, and today we finalize our journey through the history, traditions, and influences of El Día de los Muertos. But first, how about we give a big thanks to the Living Arts and Science Center in Lexington, Kentucky. In this video, we will explore the European influences on El Día de los Muertos. I will also share a story, and at the end, I will teach you a craft, papel picado. So let's get started. And Death said, "Emperor, your sword won't help you out. Spectre and crown are worthless here. I've taken you by the hand, for you must come to my dance." Juanita Garcia Godoy, in her book Digging the Days of the Dead, tells us that El Día de los Muertos not only has roots in the ancient indigenous practices of many of the cultures that the Spaniards encountered 500 years ago, but it also has been influenced by Christianity and other foreign cultural beliefs. Even the Spanish traditions were an amalgam, that is, a mix of several other cultures. From Catholicism, a branch of Christianity, we have inherited the feasts of All Saints and All Souls, also known as Blessed Souls. However, their origins are still under debate. So let's begin talking about the All Saints' Day feast. Rosalind Rosoff, author of the book The Days of the Dead, claims that Catholic funerary rites were an adaptation of Egyptian ceremonies for Osiris, god of life, death, and grain, who was murdered on the 17th day of the autumnal month of Athir, which corresponds to November of our Gregorian calendar. Around that time, the Egyptians believed the spirits of the dead visited their family homes. Their relatives set lamps to guide the spirits to where they had prepared food for them. Sounds familiar, right? In time, these practices were carried to Europe by the Romans and influenced Christianity. According to some accounts, the Christian Pope Gregory III delivered an oratory in the original St. Peter's Basilica in honor of all the saints on November the 1st. The primary reason for establishing a feast day for all the saints was because of the desire to honor the great number of Christian martyrs that had died. Later, Pope Gregory IV asked King Louis the Pious to proclaim November the 1st as All Saints' Day throughout the Holy Roman Empire. Today, the holy day recognizes all Christian saints and martyrs of the past, present, and future. And what about the Day of All Souls, or the Blessed Souls? November the 2nd is when Christianity celebrates All Souls' Day. Its purpose is to celebrate and intercede on behalf of the souls of the dead who are believed to be in purgatory, a place in between worlds, while undergoing a process of purging for the mistakes they made while alive. In consequence, their living relatives and friends can pray and offer masses for their dead in hopes that they will accelerate the purification of the soul in question. According to Carmichael and Sayer, authors of the book The Skeleton at the Feast, it took 4 centuries for All Souls' Feast to be widely accepted. Why? Because its origins were rooted in many pagan traditions that intended to appease and honor the dead. Christians of the time saw this as sacrilege or heresy. Remember that to the Christian conception of the world, death is something to be afraid of, whereas for many indigenous people in old Europe and even in the Americas, death was and is part of the continuation of life, and fear should not be brought into the mix. For a long time, Christian officials tried to eradicate such pagan rituals, but the one practice that included feasting with the dead in the graveyards of the Mediterranean Sea showed to be impossible to destroy. In the book Medieval Heritage of Mexico, Luis Beckman reveals the origin of literary calaveras, the comical pseudo-epitaphs read on November the 2nd in Mexico that date as far back as the 11th century in Europe. Later, in the 19th century, the Mexican lithographer José Guadalupe Posada brought them back. He used skulls, calaveras, and bones to convey political and cultural critiques and gave them their own Mexican signature. In truth, the Mexican literary calaveras are quite unique. They are humorous rather than self-righteous, unlike their European counterparts. Death in Mexican culture is so festive that it even has its own names: Pelona, Flaca, and Calaca. The imprinting of this new personality implies that immortality of the soul and the world of the living is an illusion. The Mexican death, La Calaca, shows that life and death are united and that the dead, though immortal, are still with us in the land of the living. Garcia Godoy quotes, "Mexicans are taught to befriend death instead of fear it. Part of this originates in the ancient Nahua belief that the god Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, inspired its people to value life as they were always on the brink of death. There are several more compatible traditions between Old Spanish and the current Mexican celebrations, but we will leave that for another time. In the meantime, how about I tell you a story? The Hooded Mas. For a while, people in the southwest of the United States have celebrated Dia de los Muertos. And here goes a cuento, a story from those old days. The following cuento happened between the mountains of New Mexico and Colorado, in a tiny isolated village. This story happened to Maria Rodriguez. Now, Maria and her sister Eleonor Rodriguez were not exactly the best sisters. They would argue constantly. It was a nightmare. Well, it happens that Christmas ago, when their parents were still alive, both girls received the same gift. Each one got the same type of shawl, same color, same type of fabric, same length. Both shawls were identical, and they were delighted. Finally, it was heaven. Until one of the shawls got lost, disappeared. And both girls began claiming that the remaining shawl belonged to each one of them. Well, now, that problem was long gone because, you see, Eleonor Rodriguez had recently passed away, died from a strange illness. The doctor couldn't figure it out. What was it? And now that shawl belonged only to Maria. Well, Dia de los Muertos arrived, And Maria prepared a beautiful altar and ofrendas for her parents. Oh yes, food and drinks and all the things that they enjoyed when they were alive, and pictures and cempasúchil flowers, all the good things. But when it came to Eleanor's ofrendas, well, there was none. No altar, no flowers, no drinks, no food, no shawl, nothing. As if she had never existed. The grudges that last for a long time, right? Well, time passes and Christmas arrived. And the Rodriguez family had always been on time for Christmas Mass. Now, since Maria was the only survivor of her family, she had to represent well. Now, in those times, they didn't have cell phones or alarms that could help Maria wake up on time. So, the best thing she could do was to go to bed early. She did. After several hours of sleeping, Maria wakes up, hearing the bells calling for Christmas Mass. Did she oversleep? Maria got out of the bed. She went to the window, opened the curtains, and she peered through the window, and she looked into that cold night of winter, and uh-oh, up on the hill, the lights of the church were on. Oh no, surely Maria had overslept. Now she had to hurry up. So quickly, Maria got dressed, put on her boots, her gloves, her coat, and the last thing she grabbed was that shawl. She put it around her neck and then over her head. And then she picked up the lantern and she walked out, and she walked into that cold night of winter. She walked through those spooky woods and up the hill. She finally made it to the church. Well, she put down the lantern and then she pushed in the door. And as she comes in, Maria realizes that the church was packed. Maria doesn't even remember so many people in the village, such a tiny village, but now Maria remembers it's Christmas, of course, and normally family comes over, right? And there is also a new family in town, so that could be the reason. Well, Maria also noticed that the Mass had not yet started. It was only the organ, the music of the piano playing. The priest had not come out yet. That meant that she still had time to find her family's pew, sit down before people would start talking. So she rushes down the aisle. And when she found her family's pew, Maria is a little shocked. There's people sitting in her family's pew. Ugh, how dare they? Ugh. Maria is so annoyed. But then she remembers, someone said about that new family in town, and now she thinks that since she's an orphan, likely the priest, in all his generosity, invited the new family in town to use her family's pew without telling her. Maria can handle this after the Mass. In the meantime, she just needs to find somewhere else to sit down. And as she resumes her walk, Maria feels as if one of those people sitting in her family's pew has touched her hand. Clearly, they want to talk. Maria doesn't feel like talking, especially with strangers, but maybe they want to apologize, so she better listen, right? So she leaned down to listen. But what she heard was not exactly what she was expecting to hear, because that person sitting in her family's pew said, sit with your family. Ugh, who do they think they are, calling themselves her family? Ugh, Maria is so annoyed. But of course it's Christmas, right? During Christmas, everybody is nice. Everybody's friends and family, right? Well, at this point, some of the people sitting in the front pews had slowly begun to turn their heads. So Maria takes on the invitation. And so she comes in and she sits down in her family's pew. And as she did, the music stopped and an awkward silence filled the room. But then the music began to play again. Maria thinks that there must be some sort of delay, some sort of issue, because normally when the music stops, the priest comes in and he starts the mass, right? But he didn't. So Maria remembers that last Christmas, the altar boy got stuck in a snowstorm. And the priest, along with other men from the village, had to go and retrieve the poor guy before he was gonna be looking like a paleta, like a frozen popsicle. So likely something like that was going on. Well, while Maria is lost in her thoughts, she feels that the entire room is getting hotter. And she sees that people sitting in the front rows had begun to pull down their hoods or shawls. So she feels compelled to do the same thing. Of course, the people sitting next to her did the same. And as Maria is waiting, Maria realizes that those people sitting next to her are staring at her. Ugh. Surely they want to talk. And as we know, Maria doesn't like strangers, and she doesn't like talking with others too much. But again, it's Christmas, and during Christmas, you gotta be nice. So Maria turns around, and as she does, Maria realizes that those people sitting next to her are staring at her from empty sockets. Maria looks down, and as she does, she sees that that person sitting next to her is wearing gloves with initials E.R. Could it be Eleanor Rodriguez? Maria looks up and around just to realize that the entire congregation is staring at her from empty sockets. Maria looks down and puts her hands together as if she's going to pray. But instead, Maria began to slide off that pew and slide off that pew until she reached the end of the pew. Then she took a deep breath. She stood up, and then she turned around and she began to run around towards the front door. And as she is running and running for her life, all those dead people tried to keep her inside by grabbing her from her dress, from her coat. Oh, all those people, they just couldn't. They couldn't grab her. But one hand almost succeeded. as that hand grabbed her from the shawl from behind and tried to pull her back. Oh, Maria struggled. Maria was almost choking with the shawl, but finally she turned around and she wrestled against that bony hand of her sister. And finally she freed herself from that shawl and she pushed in the door and she ran into that cold night of winter, into those spooky woods. At some point, she stopped to catch her breath. She was in the middle of the woods. She looked back just to make sure that no dead people was chasing her. Thankfully, no one was. But then Maria thinks that she needs help. But who can help her? Who? Oh, Maria now remembers the priest, of course. He never showed up at the Christmas Mass, right? So she ran to his cabin. And when she made it, she pounded, she knocked on that door as hard as she could. Ayuda, 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 ayuda. Until finally, the priest opened the door. And Maria was a little confused. She was a little disappointed too, because the priest was still wearing his nightgown. How could that be? I mean, it's 6 a.m. in the morning. It's time for the Christmas Mass, right? Or not? As the priest asked Maria to come in, and while she starts recounting what had just happened to her, Maria realizes that the Mass she just attended was not a Mass for the living. It was a Mass for the dead. Finally, the priest got ready and both went to the church. And as they come in through the back door, they see that the church is empty and cold, as it was supposed to be. As they walked down the aisle, right before the front door, Maria and the priest looked down and saw on the floor pieces of a shawl that had been torn apart. Now you know, my friends, why it is so important to celebrate our dead with some drinks, some good food, and some of the things they loved using when they were alive. Because sometimes the dead are a little attached to those things. And of course, you don't want them to come back and be angry at you and then give you a good fright. And that, my friends, it's the very end. Next, how are we gonna cut the paper? I'll tell you. We can use an X-Acto, which is a craft knife, or we can use scissors. Now I recommend the smaller ones, the ones for crafts, because you can get a good grip, and also these ones have a little bit of curve. So when you're using designs that require curves, you know, going up and down and going in circles and stuff like that, these ones are probably the best ones. But this one is also quite helpful. And of course, we need a pencil and thread and tape. So let's get started. Very well. You can print a design from internet, such as this one, and you can start from there. What you would do is to fold the paper And then you would cut the black parts using the craft knife. So you have to hold the paper steady, and I would suggest to let an adult do this. A child should not be doing this because this tool can be dangerous. So you make sure that you're holding on the paper, you have your cutting board, and then you start cutting. Putting good pressure on your cuts so you don't have to go back to them later. And there you go. You have your first cut. There you go. We can continue here. And for the most part we did it, but it's always kind of tricky. As you see, I made a mistake here, and now the frame here, the frame is off, but in other ones we have a contact there, is joined. So that's the tricky part with this type of cuttings here, and it would get far more complex with these circles here. So here's what I suggest. So here's the other option, which I recommend, is probably the best one and the easiest. Just make your own design, your own patterns. So what you want to do is you have your color paper, then you fold it in two. Good. Next, you want to make sure that you're going to start drawing from the joint part, from where you folded the paper. Okay, from here, not from the open part. So we can start with some petals, and don't start from the edge, just from about here. We put in a mark right there, right? And then we go petal 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Not perfect. Next, once you have your design, you see these lines here are not touching the edge. Then we bring it here, and then we make another little flower. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There we go. Clearly, I'm not really good at drawing. And what we want to cut is these parts. There we go. Now we take it out. If something gets stuck, you can use the blades here to help you out, cut it. Don't pull it out because then you might actually tear the paper. And there you go. Here are the parts that we don't need anymore. Once you're pleased with what you did with your design, you start putting together all your papel picados. So what I recommend is here from the top, you want to fold. Give it a margin there, half an inch probably. And here's when the thread comes so handy. Because what you want to do is to put thread here. Then you fold it. And you can either staple it, or I would go with the easiest way, which is probably taping. You can tape in the middle, or you can tape here and tape here. And is ready to hang. Then you add the other ones along the thread and you got your papel picado. And that is all for today. I hope you learned some new things that you can share with your friends. And again, let's thank the Living Arts and Science Center in Lexington, Kentucky for making all these videos possible. I am Carolina, the Storyteller, and I say until the next Cuento de Muertos, the next story about the dead. Adiós, adiós.